I hope no one noticed that I had the wrong title displayed again, because somehow I don't know. Anyway, we are here for a new great topic. Not every engineer should be a lead. Yes, that's a good one. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Adrian. So, who should be the lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was just thinking about why you sound so different on your microphone today. But anyway, who should be lead? So we're talking about the context of tech leads.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about, in a regular case, the software engineer who get promoted, not talking about designers, UX people. So really talking about the typical software development engineer, aka the programmer, who actually decided, hey, I want to go up the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
So next step would be lead, isn't it? And I think this is the flaw. Lead is not necessarily the next step. Who should be lead, to finally answer that question? I think the person should be lead who does want to lead people,
Mm-hmm.
whose primary focus is to manage and keep the relations between people, align people to a mission, and get people, let's say, onto that journey together,
Mm-hmm.
align them, lead them, right? Be the person worth following, and put the most energy and your focus into that, not into engineering, not how the things are done. Only make sure that those are done in the best way possible without blockers.
Mm-hmm.
So you become the person who is helping others actually to work, to enable them to work, not to do that yourself anymore. And I think that's the topic that many think that this is the natural progression. It is not. There is at least one other way, and we already said that there are probably many other ways to
Mm-hmm.
actually do that right. So that is my personal opinion. What do you think about that?
I think what a lot of organizations want from engineers is, the like the minimum viable employee for software is a senior engineer. So there's multiple levels of senior engineer that can get incentives to improve, to be given bonuses or other kinds of compensation that don't have to necessarily be promoted into leadership roles. Now, at the same time, I wouldn't create this ladder with the typical mid and junior ranks because those are meant for something else.
Yep.
Um, in most organizations that I work with, what organizations generally suffer with, and smaller organizations, startups, is they don't have a clear breakdown of what happens between senior and staff. So they will have different calibers of senior engineers, different calibers of staff engineers, leading like senior engineers who lead rituals but don't lead the people, right? So they have been. I am I'm working with a lot of organizations where leadership is synonymous with ownership of key rituals, right? Where you become a leader or a manager when you own the sprint planning session, or when you own the presentation to some stakeholder, or when you own the sales process to a
Mhm.
certain customer. So it is never about the number of reports, very rarely. It is very rarely about the amount of impact somebody has mostly to do with the granularization or the consistency of rituals. And teams that I work with, we generally remove these things. We remove the unnecessary rituals. Uh, and they often find out that they don't really need this sort of fake layer of leadership. What they really need is really good engineering, and really good engineering who are also very good business people, so that they can lead themselves first,
Mhm.
without requiring a large committee or a large community to push things forward.
I think that is exactly what it's about. So we're talking roughly about the actual staff engineer, what is widely known. As you said before, show, right? It is It is not everywhere the same in definition. Some are
Yeah, yeah.
just see that as a strange iteration layer, but you stick still to a team and
Mhm,
you still have a tech lead or something like that. But the most healthiest thing, as I saw there, is when the staff engineer is kind of the freelancer inside the company.
mhm,
Uh, it reports directly to the staff. It is very often to CTO or highest engineering managers.
mhm,
They get specific roles temporarily, like help in this team to get over a specific journey, implementing continuous delivery, TDD, those kind of things. They
mhm,
struggle with, help them. You are the most, but you have specific set of rights. You are allowed to change things without permission because we trust
mhm,
you. That is the reason why you're staff engineer. So you have a temporary role as a change maker. That is what you are, and
mhm,
that is
mhm,
extremely valuable as a company because that is the libero, in football or in soccer would be that role. So it is the person who is allowed to do whatever is necessary in a dynamic way. So I decide today we need to do this without making a big, as you say, a big committee or
mhm,
setting up one and discussing everything, because then you are proxy again, and you shouldn't be a proxy. You should move the needle forward, and that is typically, for me, if you want to be the practitioner as a software engineer for the rest of your career, because that is your actual potential, not
mhm,
leading stuff. So you want to be the abstract of the software developer, you want to stay that, then aim for that one. Because the only thing which changes is you are not part of a team anymore. Now you are a part between teams, and you basically jump in between teams, which is can be very interesting because you constantly see new challenges.
yeah.
You can actually take challenges which are on your level because you have learned so much that you would waste yourself a little bit just doing over and over the same things and not progress on your own scale anymore. But if you
Mhm,
now jump in between verticals and you help wherever you can bring the knowledge from other verticals in, that is valuable. That is not what tech leads are doing. Very often we think, the tech lead needs to do this, we need to hire a better tech lead. No, 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 that's not how it's done. A tech lead is here to lead the people inside a vertical. That's the primary job of a lead. And that
mhm,
is why so many engineers who actually got falsely into the role of leadership, where they thought I can now move the needle forward,
mhm,
suddenly realize they don't need to move the needle forward. What they actually do is need to align people and not do engineering. And I think that's a dangerous path if you are stuck in this path and you are afraid to ask to go back. Because I heard that a lot, that people told me, like, yeah, we've promoted someone already into tech leadership. And I
mhm,
then I said, then just let him go and make a staff position out of that. Yeah, it's not possible. You can't do that in the hierarchy we have.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can't go back. It's a little bit like lead is above staff engineer. In that case, you can't go back. And then I said, just make it go back. And then it's a problem because the rigidness of many organizations, and then CTOs need to actually fight for something obvious. That's another topic. So be aware of
mhm.
that, you understand before you promote yourself or someone else into a specific position that this is actually your potential.
I had a client once whom I was advising on recruitment in their recruitment process, and they were looking for a job basically for that, for tech lead or staff. And in a lot of organizations, this one in particular that I'm gonna highlight as an example, they were positioned as a senior engineer, and in their conversations, my client and the company constantly went back and forth about valuing the client's ability to facilitate and to introduce processes and to sort of connect the glue in between the teams, which is what either an agile coach or a staff engineer would be doing in other organizations. So I suggested that, hey, do a counter offer, like bring up the topic about, hey, do you guys want a staff engineer or at least a tech lead of some kind, or the word we used at the time was it escapes me, um, like a guild lead, if that exists, right? So where there's a specific backend engineering or developer experience, if that exists as like a cross team responsibility, but still pull that into the contract as early as possible to differentiate yourself. And the company was very rigid about it. Like they had a clear need for their talent, for their competence, and for their unique ability.
Mhm.
But all they offered was generic senior engineer, and even the senior engineer position was like a generic unranked engineer position that implied it had senior responsibility without the extra pay cut. Like it was very low on like the market rate. Um, and they said, "Oh, we don't hire staff engineers; we only promote internally." Um, and that was a very weird discussion, right? Because you establish fit, you establish um, need, like opportunity, and they were very sad about that. I mean, in hindsight, I don't know. Maybe it was for best for them to avoid that organization. But it makes me wonder, like, how many organizations just aren't clear about their verticals and their needs, and they do silly decisions like this, where they say, "Oh, we have senior engineers, and then CTO, and then everything in between is it is an extreme bump in influence," rather than, yeah, but what if we had 5 levels of senior with very small payment bumps, and we do that instead? It seems to work out well for larger organizations. And maybe we don't even need the sort of senior, mid, or junior engineer levels. Maybe we just need senior, tech lead, staff, principal, and that's enough. And so that we actually use words rather than numbers to delineate these various stages.
I'm a personal fan of a lower PDI, so power distance index.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Could you
actually,
explain that to our viewers who are unfamiliar with the book?
yeah, the power distance index is basically let's break it down to something simple. So it is basically a vertical, and the larger the higher the vertical is, the higher the number is. The more instances you have in between the
Mm-hmm.
lowest point and the highest point. The
Mm-hmm.
more you have, the more bureaucratic you become. And sometimes it's like you wait for the leader to speak. The typical, what we
Mm-hmm.
for example, China is a high PDI country, while America is the lowest PDI country. And that's a little bit of this. You try to remove hierarchy in order to lower the PDI.
Mm-hmm.
That is what works really well. So the most idealistic team for me with a low PDI would be a leadership person who is amongst and not above the
Yeah.
actual team, and is just taking the role of the communicating leader, but is a form of a specialist and not a person others need to report to. That would be basically PDI of 1, because there's just a distance of 1 on the horizon. You could even say 0. And I really like that. Unfortunately, it is not like that. And what you just said reminded me of that. Just remove that to the absolute necessity. But in my opinion, the principal engineer or the engineering manager, they don't really need to be like the boss of someone else, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. I wouldn't even do that to see that as a bump up in the PDI. I would
Mm-hmm.
see it actually in a same level thing. So you need to have a CTO because it is C-suite. It doesn't make sense to sit in between the
Agreed.
engineers, but because that is a business role. So you need to make business is another thing. It's direction, but everything in, especially if you just have 10, 20, or let's say up to 50 people, having 1 or 2 tech leads is enough. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to have for every 3 people a new instance, because
Yeah.
otherwise you have such a high power distance index that the person at the bottom doesn't even know 2 levels above them, never
Mm-hmm.
talk to them, and there is basically no decision making happen, because you don't do that, because it doesn't make sense. It has too much friction. It basically loses itself. It's just like too many let's say, or too thick cables. It's a little
Hmm.
bit like that. The thicker the cable is, the less likely you get power through or electricity through. And this is the very same thing with an organization. You need to have it like a thin layer so that it can flow, and that is extremely important. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is a important matter for that to understand. Yeah.
Many CTOs that I coach seek help in figuring out how to compensate their best engineers. Should they promote them? Should they
Mhm.
give bonuses? Should they have merit-based bonuses? Should those bonuses be applied to their team or be individual? like incentives are really tricky because they can really backfire really quickly, and generally they're set up for a quarter or more, and sometimes they're yearly, sometimes they're permanent in a contract, without annexes or anything else to actually soften them up a little bit so that you can tie them to OKRs or softer goals. The answer that I usually give them is, well, if they're a great engineer, work with them and figure it out, but please don't remove them from the vertical. Like, whatever you do, don't remove them from the vertical. Don't remove the best engineers from the vertical. Meaning that,
What do you mean by vertical in that?
well, in most organizations, management positions are not inside the product engineering vertical, right? So an engineering manager is usually not inside the team.
Yeah,
A product manager is usually not inside the team. It's a completely different vertical. They have an engineering vertical and a people vertical,
This is the
which is completely
departmentization. Yeah.
backwards, right? And small organizations don't need this. Startups, especially organizations in Europe where it's already too much bureaucracy for mostly everything. So I always tell them, look, if you're gonna promote your best engineer, just please, like, don't remove them from the team. Now, they can be teamless, but don't remove them from the general area that they work in. If they're a great engineer, great, give them more complex engineering projects. Just don't make them babysit juniors. Don't like put them in some like people management vertical, and then your best engineer becomes a staff engineer, and now their calendar is performance reviews and pipping people. Like that's just completely asinine. Like it's such a quick way to backfire, or worse, I don't know. I had a situation with one of the CTOs where their best engineer was a staff engineer who was also a very good DevOps person, because they were the one engineer who could do anything in the stack, which is, you want more of those, right? And then instead of recognizing the talent and putting them into a project where they could do anything on that project alone, they continuously try to push this person away to be some kind of manager of a internal SRE org. And that took so much, relationship building and influence and trial and error to figure out that no, but A, that's not what the organization needs, and B, that's not what the engineer wants. And it's also not their strength. It just happens to be that they got good at overcoming a nasty obstacle in order to do engineering work. But they're not good at having organization-wide or institution-wide knowledge about facilitating that in other teams, especially if they don't like being a team lead.
You should always try to get everything so if you're thinking circles, get it into one circle and not create a lot of circles next to each other, because those are boundaries. You need to overcome those boundaries. People tend to not overcome them. They tend to avoid them. So the more of those boundaries you have, the more procrastination you have, the less communication you have, the more avoidance you have, the more isolation is all the negative aspects you can imagine, because of because we are not AI. So it's not, so we have an ego in us and it works always. So now the stoic part comes through again. And you actually need to be in that moment and understand that every of these boundaries will bring you closer to an organization that is stuck. So when we talk about organizations that are stuck, when they call for help, you get in there, and the first thing they show you is, we have so many organizations, organizational layers, horizontal, vertical. They are fucking proud of that. And they're like, we need to just find a way that they can communicate better. Yeah, maybe make this, so stop departmentalization, get them back into one, and let them do that. Because suddenly they start to talk to each other. That is not rocket science. That is human behavior. If you sit two people next to each other, they start to talk to each other. That is nature. They will do that, right? But if you sit them into separate rooms and don't give them a door in between, they will not talk to each other. I guarantee you. Even if you put the phone number there, they will not call the other person. And that is the issue. I'm looking for a graphic I've done. I wanted to share. But anyway, just go ahead if you have something in between.
Yeah, we also said we would be discussing the idea of promotion cycles so that people, engineers, wouldn't be promoted needlessly into management positions or baited into like weird leadership positions that are not either refined enough or not structured enough for them to be productive in that role. We've already touched on it briefly, but I do want to emphasize that your best engineer's merit is not primarily their ability to uplift the team, right? So what I mean by that is that this idea of your senior engineers should be great at, pulling up their juniors and pulling up the mid levels, because it creates the wrong precedent that juniors or mid-level engineers or other seniors can't be efficient on their own by default. So they always need somebody to babysit them. So it just reinforces a kind of gatekeeping in the organization. What I'm always striving for is, what you want is a well-rounded engineer who can work alone on a project and interface with others if necessary.
Yeah.
And it's even best that that interfacing has to do with product ability and not engineering ability. And God forbid if they can't execute the pipeline on their own, right? So if there's, I don't know, if end to end a feature requires a sprint meeting, ticketing, I don't know, sign off from an internal product person, design, backend work, front end work, deployment, some SRE person chiming in. If this is the minimum ceremony for one engineer, regardless of rank, to get things through, then the overall velocity of such an engineer is that they can never autonomously operate as one engineer. They will always operate at 0.1 engineer or 0.2 engineer, because their work requires ceremony, and being present on the ceremony meetings is coming from their own time, is coming from their own budget, especially if it's synchronous or if they get blocked and then they have to go work on something else. So it's this, your goal should, as a leader, as a CTO in such an organization, as a CEO in such an organization, your best bet for a small startup or scale up is to emphasize how much a single engineer can get done alone, so that you can get 100% out of a single engineer, so that they can think about the problem, that they can suggest, that they can proactively work without waiting and without being blocked, without requiring huge committees to coordinate them. And where most leaders go wrong is that they seek all of these. They think that a single person can never do all these things alone. So we will always need some kind of committee, some kind of scrum, some kind of sprint planning, some kind of stand-up, some kind of weekly meeting, some kind of product management sync, and or stakeholder sync, or multiple levels of sync, a roadmap sync, a stakeholder sync, then a C-suite sync, then a management sync, and then the engineers meet every week with the wrong people.
And then after 1 week, the CTO says no.
Yes.
I didn't know about that. I don't want it.
Yes, or the engineers tell them that they're still not finished with what they were working on last week, so why bother with another planning session?
Exactly.
And usually what happens is that there is this comeuppance of an engineer where you see talent in somebody to be able to manage this process, but then leadership basically makes them responsible for leading the ceremonies that are part of this dysfunctional cycle, rather than figuring it out. Okay, if this person worked alone, they wouldn't need the ceremony. How can we scale that? How can we remove the meetings? How can we remove the ceremony so that they don't need it? And then only when they don't need it do we then offer support for the same function, but on demand, on a pull-based system, so that an engineer works autonomously, they get given goals, it's asynchronous, and then they need to coordinate with, hey, I think this touches your work and your work, let's sync up, let's work together for a few hours, and then let's make a plan. And then a product person comes in and gets pulled in on demand when an increment was created, or when an idea was iterated on and they ran into a dead end and they needed more feedback. And to be in that process rather than trying to create some ideal feature factory or some ideal organizational process that usually doesn't lead anywhere. Especially now with AI usage. I see a lot of AI usage problems stem from the fact that their management hierarchy is completely ceremony based, and all of their AI usage is completely individualistic. And then that doesn't make any sense because already individualistic optimization on an AI level doesn't give you a lot of benefits. Plus, if the committee is already wasting a lot of time in the ceremonies, then now there's also no time to include the AIs in that workflow. So it just creates this like weird echo chambers where organizations have all of this process, and you would think that the staff engineers should be correcting it, but really it's this. If you have the staff engineers correct the dysfunctional process, that's the biggest waste of your money, because they should be the one not part of this process because they're the ones that don't need it. But they shouldn't be the one fixing it because that's on you as a CEO or the CTO, right? So mostly what I see in organizations is where there's this like management dysfunction to lead senior and mid-level and junior engineers, and then you have these like staff engineers who sort of deviate and get out of this process and want to work alone. Especially in the last few years, this has been quite common in a lot of organizations, a lot of industries that I've observed, and it's actually healthy. But you got to be realistic about, hey, like the staff engineers, like the most competent people are avoiding that ceremony for a reason because it's not constructive, right? So we need to then use that as feedback to say, hey, if a staff engineer doesn't need those meetings, maybe your senior engineers also don't need those meetings. Maybe the people who are in those meetings have better things to do than try to feed more energy into a system that doesn't work.
So, which we get to the point of the actual topic today. There are two people or two types of roles which should work together on that in order to make it right. This is on the one hand, the leadership person who is making sure that this waste doesn't happen and the people are free to work, and encourages to take ownership and give parts of the ownership to them so that they actually can take it in the responsibility. And the staff engineer who is doing the same thing, not just in relations, but more in the practical matters, in helping a team to achieve this form of. So if a tech lead is providing ownership and tells a person to work autonomously, then you should have seniors. So we could say the cornerstone seniors. This is how I called them back then when we started the stream. This is the senior who is actually supporting teams. But that is basically the staff engineer in role. So it's an engineer who is supporting a team by itself to actually get to the point to meet the expectations. So the leadership person needs to set correct expectations and not put people into isolation, into ceremony. So basically, that is not a big choreography. That is development, which means that it's dynamic and it must be in a flow. And you, as a tech lead, you need to make sure that this happens. That is a good manager behavior. And the staff engineer is the person who unlocks the capability of doing so, because you cannot expect from a team of 3 juniors and a pseudo senior who is just 3 years engineer now and somehow got the rank of a senior. You cannot expect from them to work autonomously on complex tasks. You need to have someone sent to them like a sergeant who said, you know what, I've seen it all. I help you for the next weeks. And then you are on your own. But that is what I would expect. That is basically internal mentoring as well. We often forget that mentoring is important, but it doesn't make sense that the junior is mentoring the junior or the intermediate as disguised as a senior is mentoring juniors.
And that's one of the primary dysfunctions that I see in organizations that try to be very noir and agile and extreme programming, and then they pair a lot, but the pairing is ineffective if there's no product person around, or if there's no, your best engineers need to be part of the program. Like one of the worst things that I've observed in an organization is when there's a lot of pairing going on, but the juniors were the only ones pairing because the juniors felt helpless, so they welcomed all the help they could, and the staff engineers always had their hands full, so they always worked alone. And so it just created this bubble where the juniors were already so ineffective that they just wanted to have like this support group, like Juniors Anonymous, and they would just pair with each other just to, try to support each other in any way possible, but they're not competent enough, right? So pairing is
There's no
great.
learning effect either.
Pairing is great, but it has to be organization wide. You can't just go into an organization and say, okay, we need to be pairing from now on. Who wants to pair with me? And then obviously the first junior engineer who doesn't know what to do raises their hand. Like, it has to be top down. Like, if you want pairing to be effective, you need to find a way to pair with your best engineers, with your best people.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. I wouldn't do that because, first of all, pairing means that you put two headcounts on one issue, and for that, you need to have benefits, like you make sure that the least experienced person in the room will bump up in experience. So that is one of the things, and that you actually work towards a goal, because two juniors, bloody juniors, I don't mean it mean right now, but if you put them next to each other and they pair, the only thing is they both wondering about what they do there. So that
arguing,
that is absolutely ineffective. First of all, the junior is still a learning role. It is not an executive role in terms of engineering. It is because we don't really have apprenticeships anymore. So the junior is the first initiation. So you need to have someone, at least let's say a recently promoted senior would be the adequate thing, not the intermediate. The intermediate is the person who is just able to work on its own without handholding.
Adrian, those things can now mean different things in different organizations. I just want to bring it back down to the core idea of the episode, which is that it's important not to bait your engineers into some promise of, okay, you're a great engineer, but now you need to figure out leadership.
Yeah.
Now leadership is good in a sense, but what we must absolutely emphasize here is that we want the engineers to acquire the leadership skill. What we shouldn't strive for, and you as CTOs and as engineering leaders and as CEOs, do not strategize and incentivize engineers to grow by dangling a centralized leadership position. Because you will always have less centralized leadership positions than you have engineers. So if there's multiple people competing for that slot, and sometimes you don't even have that slot, it makes no sense. So if you sell the tech lead position of, okay, and the only way for a senior engineer to be promoted is to become tech lead. Tech lead is synonymous with team lead. So we can only have as many competent tech leads as we have teams. So we will only train one person per 5 engineers. And that's crazy. Like that's a very unsupportive environment. And it happens way too often, I think, still. Like in 2026, it's happening way too often. And as far as I can tell, it's completely accidental. Like it's just a matter of not thinking it through enough and not simplifying and clarifying the incentives strongly enough. And it baits engineers into this tug of war of, okay, we need a lead. Who's going to lead? Lead means team lead, so the best engineer will be the team lead, and then that wastes the best engineer's talent. It also wastes the manager's ability to be able to be part of like how the sausage is made, and it creates a lot of friction. It needlessly creates a lot of friction, and then CTOs get overwhelmed trying to undo the consequences of that friction. But it's too late. It's too little, too late. It's just surface level band-aids. They usually miss that there's a underlying incentive that's completely misaligned.
No, it's first of all a rigid system. So as soon as many companies grow, and that's an issue, because when they are small, you can shape them. The CTOs directly shape. They made decisions, and the CEOs as well. And suddenly they become larger. The larger they get, the more rigid the systems become. Maybe there is a company above that who now changes or dictates how to do so. The C-suite of the original startup becomes a proxy, and it's not basically a C-suite anymore. And then suddenly you have it. It's like, oh no, we have this system now. You can't just change it. You need to live with it. And if you then have exactly what you just described, what most have, then you basically don't change anything as a mid-level leader anymore. So you see the issue but can't do anything about it. And as a CTO, you are so bothered with everything that you don't really, it's like you see so many teams like, I can't change them all at the same time. You have so many fallacies coming up at the moment that you find reasons to not change it, even though you see it, because there's an ego again. You can't do that. And it is a lot of work. It is a huge challenge, and it goes with you, and you don't want to be personally responsible for that. So you more find ways to cope with it and, to soothe the minds out there instead of actually changing something. And you can change it. It is not like it is impossible to change, but when I talk to CTOs especially, they say, yeah, I know we need to do this, but we have this migration, we have this redesign, we have this logo change, we have this. And we need to get all this done, and then we can change. And that is the issue. So you cannot fix these kind of things, the kind of issue of the topic of today, just overnight. Especially, but you can do something step by step to improve that. And the first thing is to, first of all, create a new career branch, which is not tech lead. That is the very first thing I would do. It's like, if you don't have staff engineers yet, which is very common actually to mid-level startups, as where they don't really know what the stuff is like. This is the highest paid engineer. No, it is a freelancing engineer inside your organization. That is the easiest thing to describe it. And so it is a non-bound to teamless person, teamless person, right? And must have experience, must be senior, and these kind of things. And that is a very good way to, as you said, to give a path to promote into for seniors without need to give away all the fine aspects of engineering and become the person who is supposed to lead people, but you don't want to lead people, and somehow you have the necessity to still code, so you don't really lead the people while you're expected to do so. So you actually do the staff engineering role, and somehow you need to do management as well, and that actually kills your joy entirely, and you actually start to hate your job. People don't like your performance, and it is not helping anyone. And you will see that most people who understand what real leadership role is, they actually don't want to have it. They would like to have the staff engineer role instead. And that is a totally different set of issues you have, because the real leadership person is someone who needs to be willingly leave behind an older profession and gets totally new skill sets and develop those, and become a person who is happy with supporting others instead of actually doing the work yourself. You will see that if you say now you have, let's say 10 teams, right? And then you have, let's say 10 leadership persons, if you want to do it old school, and you have some in between, that is actually suddenly not, that is a lot of positions if people have the choice to take this position or something else. You will see that you will have a shortage of real leadership persons, and everyone wants to go into the staff role. So that is something you need to take into consideration as well.
One of my clients that I've been working with for almost a year now, they've successfully gone through this transformation, and it was not easy. There were a lot of ugly phases in between where we had to question a lot of core assumptions about the org, about the hierarchy, about who's reporting to whom, about the role of the C-suite, about the role of the engineers, about compensation, about how we pick people, how we give feedback, how often we give feedback. It was really, really, like, for a moment, it was really nasty just to have this reality check of, okay, like, either we figure this out or things get really rough financially. And we did manage to get throughout, right? So I want to commend them. Like, not a lot of organizations have the stomach to go through this.
No, and it is, as you said, it is,
or the skill or the clarity of mind to say, okay, this is important, we need to do it. We got
the mind runway. That is a good.
We got a slap on the wrist. It's like, okay, runway got shorter, but okay, we can still do it. But now we need to take it seriously. And it's like, okay, everybody, reality check. This was a cold shower, cool. But now we need to focus.
That is a huge problem when you need to make a change. You need to cut something out of the budget to make the change.
Yes, like
you
something
cannot
needs
just
to
work on
vehemently change
100%
now, like tomorrow. Yes.
Then that's a huge issue out there. So
Yes.
if you're in a such situation and you want to change towards what the topic is actually called, then it makes sense to understand that you cannot change overnight, and you need to have the balls to do that. You need to have,
and you need to figure out what will work for this organization.
Yeah,
right?
That's
because there's no textbook. I know. I struggled for 3 months. Like I saw exactly what the problem was, but I had to figure out, okay, what will the organization stomach? Like, what will have the least friction to carry through like that big change that will take probably half a year or more?
That is one of the issues. Is like what I saw myself. You just said something which is very important. You said that the issue is I often get to this position where the C-suite understands, yes, we need to do this, but still there is this resistance. We can do that next week, and then you sit down for them, and they actually expect that you push them because I don't really know what to. I need to do.
And that's usually what happens, especially with external consultants. But it's really about figuring out, if we agreed that this is a problem, you need to fix it. Like I can't fix it.
No,
because if I fix it, I become the CTO of the company.
You become a constraint. You become an external dependency.
Exactly. And then I'll become a fractional CTO or whatever you call that. And that is even more dysfunctional, because then people don't know if this is temporary or permanent.
I think this is how fractional CTOs came into being, because they all were consultants or coaches, and suddenly they were fractional because they changed the organization, but they didn't make it through the people, but by themselves. And that is one of the things I never liked about fractionalism.
What I needed to solve with this team in particular is they had very large committees, a lot of emergencies, a lot of emergency triage, a lot of triage meetings, a lot of work that had to do with immediate complaints coming either from QA or from customer success or from the customers directly or from some sales representative that has the customers or accounts' best interests in mind. Plus that whole ceremony, which is on a 2-week cycle, which is a very large meeting, and then multiple levels of meetings of the C-suite above that was on a much larger cadence for a much larger time horizon. Like, think of road mapping, like large detailed road mapping sessions. And the primary problem was that I had to do a lot of experiments. Like, what will they be open to? Where can we move the needle? How can we run multiple experiments in parallel? How can we get multiple people on board so that we move multiple levers at the same time? Because there's going to be a big shift. And I just couldn't do it at that, organizationally, it's just too slow, right? Like the cadence of organizational change was too slow. Performance review was on a quarterly basis. If something went wrong, we didn't talk about it until the end of the quarter, right? And I wanted to talk about it tomorrow morning. Like, it's okay, they didn't go as planned. Okay, we talk tomorrow morning, right? And if it's painful, let's do it more frequently. And that was the first thing. That took nearly 2 months in the beginning, just for me to figure out how to get the failure rate up, basically. How to run multiple experiments of culture change, of process change, of team change rapidly, so that we could figure out what the heck works, what the heck doesn't work. And those experiments that I introduced included dynamic reteaming. So instead of thinking of the team as something static, we would expand the team and reform the team depending on the need. Dynamic planning cycles. So instead of planning out a 2-week cycle, we would plan out a 1-week cycle or a 4-week cycle, a 3-week cycle. Then I decoupled the cycles from the dynamic teams so that each team had their own cycle length. That allowed me to work with the fastest team, because if there's 10 people, 15 people, then you're working at the slowest person's cycle. And some teams had a 2-week cycle still from that old system, But as you started dynamically reteaming, the more productive people stood out, and they were on a 2-day cycle. And then the decoupled cycle allowed me to work very rapidly with the best people. And then they started to, the gap even became bigger because, hey, if I don't need the meeting anymore, okay, I can be just the people on a shorter cycle just become suddenly more productive. And then there was this issue of, okay, the process was optimized for the people who are slow. So it's PR, second review, third review, like 2 mandatory approvals, and then there's merge, and then a fourth person deploys. And obviously now the fast cycle people can't work under this process because they will bury everybody else in unmaintainable amount of process overhead. So we needed to change the process. We needed to allow the off cycle, like the slow cycle people, to work with PRs, and the fast cycle people to work with trunk-based development. And then we had this whole stint of, okay, trunk-based development has quality gates and PRs have quality gates. And so you can mix and match as much as you want, and we won't stigmatize or judge you for which one you're on. It's just that, hey, they have trade-offs and they have benefits. Just use whatever is appropriate. And then gradually we saw then, after 2, 3, 4 months, we then saw that, okay, it's worth it, because the people who want to be involved, the people who want to be on that closer to the customer, shorter feedback loop, they actually produced feedback sooner, they were happier, and they felt more valued by their key stakeholders, by their key managers, by the CEO, by the CTO. So once that kicked in, like that whole incentive and the value structure, that emphasized the whole process. And then we used that as the first key differentiator for, yes, we had it the right way, and yes, it's going to be hard, and yes, it's worth it. And now we need to double down on it. So we then took that, what worked, and we increased the intensity even further, which was even more difficult for the people who were laggards, right? Who were an iteration, a culture change cycle behind the what I would call early adopters, right, of the new culture. And that's very important to be aware of that.
We have a comment. I would like to go over it, and I think it is has something to do with you have said. Kayashi Kino said or asked, "Isn't it too much of a pivot, or does it create 1% betterment every time? A team of slow and fast in groups, better outcome in summation. Does it work out each time?"
I think so. I want to address the 1% question first. Like the 1% argument makes sense if you're already very, very close to your ceiling, right? If you're like at the 90% of 100 and you wanna really max out that last little bit, and over time, we're talking hundreds or thousands of iterations, that little compounding effect will slowly trickle through while the ceiling through external factors also starts growing. But it doesn't make sense if your ceiling is here and your current performance is here, and you're saying, oh, we have enough time to get from here to there with 1% increments. If the gap is very large, you need to do something drastic, right? Especially if you could just go and hire somebody who's here. The problem is, if you improve these people by 1% and then hire somebody who's here, the likelihood of them falling down to this level, or feeling disrespected or treated differently than the other team who isn't taking the engineering culture changes seriously, are so destructive through interpersonal relationships, through management bias, stigma, preferential treatment, like the whole political scheming, the office politics, and even the legality of it. If you create unfair incentive structures, I think are so destructive that it's just much better to cut to the chase and say, okay, if it's existential and we need to change this, we need to make a radical change today, and then work up from that.
Follow up, he asked or stated. Got it.
And
Essentially cutting time delay by changing team or person.
Maybe I got the. Do correct me in case I misunderstood your question. So you're asking, I'm reading your previous comments as well. Isn't it too much of a pivot, or does it create a 1% betterment every time? A team of slow and fast in groups, better outcome in summation. Does it work out each time? Got it. Essentially cutting time delay by changing team or person. So generally, most now I don't want to generalize. Sorry. Let's not generalize. In my experience, the teams that call for me for help, where the pain is 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, teams are not teams. So a team would be a soccer team where we have a match, right? It's your favorite soccer team versus your not favorite soccer team, and we're all playing the same match. Like, there's this one task, and there's 20 people on the field, and we're all playing the same thing. In my experience, teams that struggle with having a productive or constructive engineering culture or establishing one, their teams don't function as a team. Their teams are mostly a administrative unit that shares a manager, which is from a people management vertical, and their engineers are very likely to be working on different tasks. So what I see in such teams generally is one team, 5 people, 12 tickets, 5 in progress, and 3 engineers. That's not a team. So it's very difficult to say, well, we can just improve the team or the glue between the team, the camaraderie, the engineering process, and then it'll rub off and fix itself. In my experience, such organizations are already stagnating and they need radical change. They have either given up or are demoralized or are disincentivized, and there has been some kind of letdown, some kind of maturation event that failed, and then they've given up, seeking new of those challenges, and that behavior then gradually normalizes, right? So usually this is that sort of A player to B player to C player effect, where the company grew, they had a lot of A players, then they grew very rapidly, and then hired a lot of B players, and then the A players left. And now that sort of decline in engineering culture and productivity has been normalized to the degree that it's stigmatizing very, very experienced engineers from standing out of the crowd. So generally, in my experience, you gotta make radical change in order to at least show to the organization that you're taking it seriously. Slow change is good for a stable organization that is very close to the ceiling. I agree. But it can be
you need
very
to
destructive.
define who is making radical change. So
The CEO, the CTO,
exactly.
top down, of course,
Because
top
bottom
down,
up,
top down.
bottom up
No,
is
bottom up doesn't work.
radicalism. Bottom up leads to you get fired. That is a little bit of an issue, or you get put elsewhere.
Or you burn out and you quit, and yeah, it's not worth it.
It is not worth it, and it is not even easy. So I wouldn't take it as that easy, because I never saw that actually as an easy thing.
Yeah.
Even in startups, because as soon as one of the let's say one of the leadership persons on the highest level are against that change, especially business, nothing happens anymore. So you're stuck then. And most CTOs are still second grade citizens in the C-suite. So the CTO in most cases is not a real C-suite person. That is an issue as well. We should take that into account. Yeah.
One of the things that you got to watch out for, if there's any kind of shielding going on in your organization, where product people are being shielded from engineers, or if engineers are being shielded from customers, or if whenever there's like some artificial wall of these groups of people shouldn't be talking to those groups of people because it's a waste of time, that would be concerning, because it's those measures primarily protect that old status quo. They protect some kind of comfort zone that turned out to be unproductive, and now it creates an immune system, and so an organization that isn't doing well. So if I use a diet analogy, if you aren't eating healthy, you will have a habitual response to eating healthy, as in I don't wanna. That's weird for me, right? Like it'll weird you out to eat healthy if you got accustomed to not working out and eating unhealthy all of your life. So it's not to say that you have an immune response, your body rejects it, but your soul rejects it. Like it's just weird for you to suddenly eat healthy and drop all of your bad habits, right? That's what's happening in these organizations. So it's to allow for that unhealthiness and the healthiness, and to contrast it and to say, okay, look, we're going to try this, and if this is better, we're going to stop doing this in favor of this, or both if that's possible. But if it's not possible, let's do the one that is healthier, and primarily try to figure out what kind of experiments, as radical as that they might be, you as a leader, or if you're as an engineering manager, you want to figure out how to use your influence to evangelize and influence and spread the word on any cultural experiment that turned out to be successful, because it'll be mostly invisible to the organization, right? So that is one of the key points that I work on in these kind of transformations, is that people are so focused on the negatives that, okay, cool, there's a lot of stuff going wrong, what are we trying? That we're trying, and then when it's successful, it's like elevate it, like take a megaphone and say, hey, this was really great. Like normally something like this would have failed, or normally something like this would have taken 3 months, and like we need to contrast that. We need to show the difference now. We need to show that, hey, look at this project. You remember we had a project like this last year. Last year it took 4 months. Now we solved it in 2 days. Right? We need to elevate that. We need to emphasize it so people can see the example, and then you connect the dots. And then people get curious, and people get inspired, and some people relax, and some people feel a little bit more valued. And there's a lot of, meat to go around, and everybody can share at the table. So it's, once the success stories trickle in, and there always will be if you're taking this process seriously, just be ready to share and be ready to invite people into that process. So first off, of course, what I always do, I create a little like a bubble around the experiment, so that we establish a backward compatible layer with the old organization, so that our experiment, our change that I'm doing with the CTO isn't evoking a immune response from the people who are not part of the experiment, so that beyond that boundary, people don't know that the experiment is going on, so that they won't comment that, hey, this is weird, right? So we establish that bubble first, and then we do the bubble inside the experiment, and that experiment needs to produce data and must be culturally successful with only the people inside the experiment. So the setup needs to be very careful. And then when it does produce good results, we then remove the noise from the signal, and then we bring that data in first to the people on the team, and then to the people on the edge, and then we burst the bubble, and then we let that spread, and then we let the CEO know, and the CTO know, and the others know, and then it slowly starts, like telephoning through the entire organization, and then we do another experiment, and then another one, and then another one, and another one, and then suddenly it becomes this thing that the CTO and the CEO are doing with Dennis, and well, it's been really successful, and oh, I didn't know that we had all those issues, and yeah, it's a lot better now. And it's mostly unwitnessed, sadly, at the beginning, but then it kicks in, and you just get this underlying, feeling of fulfillment that, yeah, it was worth it. And now suddenly people are starting to realize that, hey, like, yes, we did a lot of stuff together, and it allows you to build relationships in a way that's unique to like getting a company out of a crisis. And sometimes it can also be very fun for me, at least.
No, it's not fun for the people. So that we need to be honest here. Fun for the coach, maybe because it's work, but in reality, it is not. It is change. Change is not fun for anyone there.
Yeah, and I appreciate the challenge. Like being able to push people, it's hard work, but it's also very rewarding, at least for me.
It is rewarding because as a coach, as a mentor, both the same thing. You learn things from
Mm-hmm.
one organization and you can transfer it into
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
organization. And
Yeah.
that is, I had a discussion today with
Mm-hmm.
another person who is getting into the mentoring right now. He is a freelancer. He said to me today, I can't go back into employment because I am already on that level where I see too many things I want to change. And he's doing that right now as a freelancer, as
Yeah.
a freelancing person who is actually doing more kind of mixture of consulting and executing,
Mm-hmm.
and going more and more into this consulting area, because that is the natural thing. You learn so many patterns that you simply cannot go back into being part of some leader who doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know what he's doing or she's doing, I don't know. And you
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. So I understand that, and that is the charming part of a coach. So in the first years, you have challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
if you survive that series of challenge, you actually become comfortable. This is what you say is a funny thing. I needed to correct you because it's not funny for the people you're working with. It is funny for you because you became comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you know that this change doesn't hurt you, and
Yeah.
it change doesn't hurt the others. It actually improves. But the others are always in front of their personal
Mm-hmm.
resistance to change every time they start that. And it is relentless, that resistance. And
Mm-hmm.
overcoming that is the actual, it is rewarding. I agree. It is rewarding, but it is hard to get. And I would say there's a failure rate of convincing people to do that. Not
Mm-hmm.
everyone is or willing to be convinced. Many people say, you know what? I think you're right, but you need to go now. I happened that already. So
Yeah.
it's like it exists that people actually say, we don't want this change right now.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Goodbye. Right?
Like, well, one of the things I see most often come up as a form of resistance or objection from leaders or CTOs that I work with is this idea that, oh, that's normal here. Like, we're not looking to change that. And
It's the best. Yeah.
it usually comes up as a response when I say, hey, that thing that happened today in the meeting, like, let's talk about that. Let's address it publicly in front of the team because that's unhealthy. Whether it was a snide remark or some kind of microaggression or some kind of assumption that we're going to fail anyway, or, like these little small, either verbal tics, microaggressions, or assumptions that the customer is an idiot, or the product people never understand engineering, or we are never on time anyway, or we don't have time for fundamentals, or we need to token max with Cloud, or these little fundamentals, if you let them linger and fester, they will explode, and they will get out of your control, and they will take over your company. So, one of the things that I get like most of my heavy conversations, difficult conversations with engineering leaders, is primarily about this topic of, hey, if you want to build leadership within your team, if you want to make staff engineers out of your senior engineers, or if you want to sort of start extrapolating different levels of calibers of engineers beyond senior, then you can't let this slide. Like, you need to address like those little issues that come up in like day-to-day things. And if they don't go well, or even worse, if they keep repeating and you keep giving the same feedback and nothing changes, then you also need to learn how to escalate. And sometimes you're escalating too much one-on-one, and it should be publicly in front of the team. Maybe you're doing it too much in front of the team, and you should be doing some of these things one-on-one. So getting that detail right, it's very important. But what's even more important is the frequency of it. Like, the cultural change frequency needs to speed up to the degree that we can advise and teach every day, multiple people every day, multiple times per day, right? Like, I should be able to sync up with my client, an engineering leader, a CTO, and they should be able to tell me 10 different things that they improved today with regards to conversations that they had. Not 10 things maybe at the end of the quarter, because the difference is night and day.
It is. You can only change things today, not in the future, because
Exactly.
that is probably a form of procrastination. And that is this typical cycle we have everywhere. You need to commit to yourself to something in the morning, and if you need to have a coach for that more than several months, you have actually not improved. So on some point, the coach or the mentor for that specific case should be not necessary. You should run by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
asking
Mm-hmm.
yourself the question every morning, what should I commit for today? Premeditation is important as well. Like, that could go wrong. I'm prepared for that. I will do it anyway. These kind of things, that you don't run into this resistance we were talking about this entire session. And then basically go into the reflection phase without anyone and saying, have I actually changed something? Where can I brag about? Have I done something right? And where was I failing? So where I've committed to do something, I haven't done it. I have said, yeah, you can do that on Monday. We have Friday, that is postponing. That is procrastination. And can I be honest with myself to say I have failed here today? So, that I'm embarrassed about that. And I spot this pattern next day because on Monday I will postpone it to Tuesday and so on, right? So can I spot on Monday the same pattern and intervene? Can I do that? Am I mature enough to do that? And I say yes, a coach is important in the beginning to form that behavior. And you have at least 10, 20 people in an organization who needs that, right?
Yes.
But on some point in time, people need to, otherwise we have this fractional person again, need to stay on there is a next level, because that for me is just the beginning to get the people into the ability to change, that they are capable of doing so. But after that, they actually need to start the journey where they change the organization. That is where the coach is actually helpful, and not by holding hands with the basics, because then you basically that is what you can do in order to suffocate a person over many years, right? And I would not do that. I don't say that you're doing that. I say that we as coaches, as mentors out there, should help the leaders to stay on their own feet, that we actually can get to the journey.
And that's then the 1% that Kayash was talking about, right? Do radical change, grow rapidly, and then maintain by doing 1% improvement. So you did a lot of change, and now some things stand out, some things were failed experiments, and now consistency. And if the market changes and we need to adapt again, then we will again do a radical change. But to me, that's sort of 1% improvement every day. That's the bare minimum. That's not enough in order to bring a bad engineering culture from the brink of bankruptcy. It's too slow, it's unreliable, and if the team isn't consistent, like the 1% everyday strategy requires consistency and good processes, and you can't expect that kind of betterment strategy from a team that isn't consistent and who doesn't have good processes.
I realized how complicated it can be for a team to get into the cycle of commit yourself to something and reflect about it as a team. And they're like, why should we do that? It's like that's some kind of mysticism, something like that. And the only thing they do is basically do nothing and try to find a reason to blame that procedure. But that is self-improvement.
I know you have to go. I just want to mention that one of the things I started introducing with most of my teams that do these kinds of things, especially if they have stand-ups, is I tell them, look, instead of having a long meeting in the morning where you actually verbally discuss the stand-up, just have updates for what you did. But 2 updates. At the beginning of the day, highlighting any blockers and what you're going to do. And then at the end of the day, what you actually did. Exactly. So that there's a beginning and an end, rather than the next day having a before and after, and then it's never consistent. So that it's in the same day. And then if there's a huge mismatch, then instead of the update the next morning, that person has a one-on-one with their coach or their manager so that they can get some support. Because otherwise you just normalize, yesterday this, tomorrow that, blah, blah, blah.
There's a high chance that you don't attend to a meeting tomorrow, and you never need to reflect on why you have failed to your own commitments, and you forget them. That's one thing as well. You simply forget what you have done and why you failed. The human brain is designed to forget overnight. You process something, but mostly not that stuff, right? So do it in the same day. Absolutely agree with you there.
2 updates the same day. Tomorrow in the morning, just check in. Okay, what are my priorities today? And then end of day update. Like, what did I get done? And if there was a huge mismatch, like a huge reprioritization, like a huge shift, that requires attention by some leader immediately tomorrow morning, first thing, without some okay, is there a problem? Is it not a problem? Should I go have a talk to them? No, just talk to them. And if it's a systemic problem, have the conversation publicly with the entire team, not just with that person.
I
right?
love that. I hate one-on-ones for this. I
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
hate them. That is isolation again, which we were talking about in the beginning. You don't need isolation. You need to discuss commitments and reflections as a team,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
as an individual. That is not a solopreneurial thing. You do
Mhm.
that. That's
Yeah.
teamwork or no work. Anyway,
Yeah, a lot of feedback that I see, more traditional managers use is wasted on one-on-ones, because then they have one-on-ones with everybody and then give everybody the same feedback. It's like just post them publicly. Like, hey guys, you let the release slip yesterday. I want you to prioritize the release today. Just tell everybody, right? And then they'll figure out that they're impacted, and then if they need help, they'll come and reach out for help. But then you can tell the entire team publicly immediately, and then after you did that, then you can have a one-on-one privately with the leader of the team, because then that's a separate discussion of, okay, I now grilled the team a little bit, you guys let it slip, and now we also need to have a chat because you're responsible for this team, and I would like you to be able to handle it. So do you need any support in handling it? And to do that every day, and to keep your radar tuned to that, because if you're watching the stream and if this was interesting to you, this is happening in your organization every day, and you're probably just not even seeing it because your brain is just filtering it out because you think that this is normal.
that was now ASMR style, right?
Okay, Adrian, let's wrap up for today. Great topic. Thank you.
Next week is a break of OTJ.
Next week is a break. I'm in Vienna meeting one of my teams.
But everyone, just subscribe to the channels. You will be able to watch it next.
Absolutely.
The week after that. As
In the future, we'll have some kind of recording to make sure that you guys get something every week. Yeah, that's it for now.
I just saw that we haven't had local recordings again because I copy a studio in Restream, which is not set to local recording. Every time the same.
It happens. It happens.